So this is Ada Lovelace. I'm sure many of you know who she is and what she did. But for as long as computers have been around, and certainly this analytical machine, humans have been trying to anthropomorphize computers. In 1843, which is a very, very long time ago if you stop and think about it, Ada Lovelace described in a paper that she was translating that somebody else had written in Italian about the analytical engine, she had annotated it with a significant number of notes. And one of the interesting notes that she wrote was this, that someday that analytical engine might act upon other things besides number. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. And further down in that paper, she wrote, a computer that could think on its own. So a few decades later, in 1939 at the World's Fair in New York City, Westinghouse Electric debuted a computer that looked and sounded just like us. And this is it.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, with a great deal of pride and pleasure, I present to you Electro, the Westinghouse Motoman. Electro, come here. And here he comes, ladies and gentlemen, walking up to greet you under his...
I am a smart fellow, as I have a very fine brain of 48 electrical relays. It works just like a telephone switchboard.
All right, now, Electro, I know you enjoy these, and I'm really going to try to give you a nice pleasure out of these. So here you are. You got that? Now,
this is what impressed everybody the most.
Oh, yes, Electro, you do need a light, too, don't you? All right, here you are. And, folks, he's only 2 years old, too. Just learning.
So this is the Motoman. And it really was built using the same system that operated phones back in the 40s, late 30s, early 40s. There was a recorded message. There were 700 recordings. And it really was, as ridiculous as this looks, it really was voice operated. There was something happening here. It wasn't just a stunt. And what I find so interesting about what happened on that day was that Electro said, I have a very good brain. And the announcer said that he was just learning. Well, by the 40s, a lot of people were thinking about the prospect of someday these computers walking and talking and sounding a lot more like us. And so if you're an Asimov fan, you probably already know about the 3 laws of robotics, which he published in a short work of fiction called Liar, that was an astounding science fiction in 1941. And in essence, the 3 laws had to do with robots not injuring a human being, robots obeying human beings, and robots protecting its own existence. And as Asimov was writing, the field of computing was progressing aggressively, which wound up causing him to write this zeroth law not too much later on. A robot may not harm humanity, or by an action allow humanity to come to harm. 10 years later, Alan Turing, noted computer scientist and mathematician, published a paper called The Imitation Game. And that's the famous Turing test. And so for those of you unfamiliar with it, there's a computer, and there's an interrogator, and then there's another participant. And the interrogator is meant to ask questions, the same questions, to both the human participant and the computer. And over time, the questions come back. They're separated into different rooms. And the test is passed when the interrogator can no longer tell the difference between the computer and the human answers. But again, he used the word thinking. So if the computer sounds like a person, he later wrote, then it must be thinking. So all this time, we have these incredibly complicated machines, and we've been trying to create them so that they act more like us. And that's excited us, these prospects. They've scared us. They've inspired us. And so a lot of times now when we think about machines that can think and our future among them, we think about Blade Runner, right? We think about sort of squishy robots, just like us, walking around, maybe being able to fool us into thinking that they are human in all senses of the word, just like we are. In reality, a lot of this has already happened, and the future of this sort of human-machine interface is much further along than you may think. And that's partially due to the field of artificial intelligence. For the past 60 years since Turing published his paper, we've been trying and failing to build the sort of perfect thinking machine. And then this happened. So this was early January, and this is Fan Hui losing to a computer in a game of Go. Does anybody in here play Go? Besides me, I'm terrible. But how many people have played chess? Okay, so we're all familiar with the rules of chess. Here's why this game, and it was so important. And if you follow the technology industry, you're going to start hearing a lot about Go, and specifically about DeepMind, which is a company based in London that's been acquired by Google. Here's why this is important. So computer scientists have been building games as a way to train machines, but also to figure out how closely they can get machines to think like us. At the beginning, chess was what they used. And now Go, which is this thousands-year-old game, is their sort of next prospect. Both are deterministic perfect information games, which means you can't really use a sleight of hand to win at them. In chess, the object is to catch the king. So once you're in checkmate, game's over, you're done. In Go, it's a lot different, and it's much more amorphous. So there's a 9x9 grid, and the object is to capture territory versus taking over a singular piece. In chess, as you probably know, each piece has different rules, and those pieces can move in certain configurations around the board. After the first play, there are 20 possible moves. Go is not like that. So in Go, every piece has equal weight, and they can all move around the board basically however they'd like. Or you can place the pieces around the board however you'd like. So after the first play, there are now 361 possible moves. And for those of you fellow math geeks, you can start doing the math in your head. In total with chess, there are 10 to the 43 possible moves. That's a lot of possible moves, but not so much that a computer can't crunch those numbers. The difference with Go is that because of the way that the pieces move and the game board is set up, there are actually 10 to the 700 possible moves. So that's actually more than all of the atoms in the known universe. Theoretically, you could probably set up enough machines to brute force figure out every single possible strategy and move, but it would take a lot of compute power. And so it's less about figuring out those set strategies and more about, so if that's tactical, right? On the chess side of things, in Go, winning is about creativity. You can't memorize plays. You have to recognize patterns. You have to understand the subtleties of your opponent, how they might be playing and for what purposes. And so it's very, very complicated. In chess, the victory is obvious. In Go, you might have to be an expert player in order to look at the board and figure out what's happening. So Alphago is an AI-powered program, a machine that can think. And it's a computer program that doesn't just think. It's now out-thought a human. We've spent more than 100 years trying to anthropomorphize our computers. So the question I would ask you is, what happens when the day finally comes, and it is coming, when we get what we say we want? So I'm going to show you 3 emerging technology trends that we've been researching, and we don't do like hocus pocus prediction stuff. This is all data-driven using a methodology that's very complicated. So I'm going to show you 3 of the trends that we're following and talk to you about implications. So I'm going to do that in 2 ways. I'm going to show you scenarios that will be relevant to you in the coming year. And then given what we know to be true today, and if we continue along on our trajectory, what does all of this mean for the year 26, 3 decades into the future? So the first one is algorithmic design. We are building algorithms to design things for us. So you're probably familiar with the word algorithm, right? So algorithms can be used for any number of things, including taking in our ideas, our design parameters, our requirements, our exemplars, and then figuring out the best possible designs for us. And what's interesting about that is you don't normally think about a creative field like design being aided all that much by a hard science, right? Like computer science. This is a scarf that was a project on Kickstarter. It was called Knit Yak. And for those of you who knit, you know that if you drop a single stitch, this is why I don't knit. I get very tense. If you drop a single stitch, it can completely destroy the pattern. Or, in the case of Knit Yak, it can change the pattern into bold, interesting, beautiful ways. So this is an algorithm that designs scarves, and no two scarves are the same. So each one is unique. Autodesk is a company that's used by a lot of different companies. And I guess I should pause now to say, I don't have any financial relationships with any of the companies that I'm talking about, just research. So Autodesk is doing things like designing the objects that we use every day, but rather than using humans plus machines plus algorithms to design something better in a way that we haven't seen before. So this is an example of a bicycle and a way to structure the material to make that bicycle much more lightweight, much easier to ride, much more aerodynamic. Now, what if algorithms could design our news? So this is a short story that I'll read a little bit of. A shallow magnitude 4.7 earthquake was reported Monday morning 5 miles from Westwood, California, blah, 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 blah. It's basically explaining an earthquake that happened. But what I find interesting is at the bottom. This information comes from the USGS Earthquake Notification Service, and this post was created by an algorithm written by the author. So this is a news story that wasn't written by a human. It was written by Ken, who's a journalist, who created an algorithm to scrape data coming from structured data inputs like the weather to automatically generate a narrative that could be read by humans and wouldn't sound weird, that could get published. And in fact, we're seeing a lot of this now. And you probably don't realize it, but if you follow the financial news, and if you read sports stories, a lot of those stories are being written by companies like Narrative Science, I should say by the algorithms that are owned by these companies. Here's an example that was in Bloomberg about US steel posting losses. That wasn't written by a person, that was written by an algorithm. But we don't think about that. What if algorithms designed our real world experiences? So that's a real concert. That was a Japanese rock star, and she is a computer program that she's huge, and people flock to see her perform in person. And she has been created by an algorithm, again, to help people enjoy this musical experience. What if algorithms designed our biology? So this is CRISPR-Cas9, which is a genomic editing program. And it does some really, really incredibly powerful things. It's able to edit at the gene line. And so, for example, let's say that you have a mosquito. Mosquitoes carry malaria. Malaria kills millions of people around the world every year. You can't just wipe out the mosquitoes because the mosquitoes are part of an ecosystem, and if you cause the mosquito population to collapse, that causes other problems. But what instead, if you could just edit out the part of the mosquito that enables it to carry malaria, and then release that treated mosquito back into the wild, it mates with other mosquitoes. After a couple of generations, you still have the mosquito population, but they no longer carry malaria by editing at the gene lines. This is extraordinary technology. Same kind of technology is being used to create cute pets. So I lived in China for a while, and this is an example of a cute pet that was popular there. This is a teeny tiny little pig that was created using genomic editing. So this was an animal that we have sculpted out of whole cloth. This is another example. We can make animals teeny tiny that are intended for pets. We can also make animals that are very large and muscular that are obviously not intended to be our pets, that are intended for another purpose. Well, we can design animals, but what if algorithms could design our people? So this is a Japanese pop group called AKB48. Originally, they were called AKB47. It's a long story, but I also lived in Japan for a while, and I'd like to say that this is a novelty. It's really not. The Japanese schoolgirl thing is alive and well. Here's a giant, huge group of 47 of them. Well, they added an 48th member named Eguchi Aimi, and this is her. She was hugely, hugely popular. She completely took over pop culture. She was on magazine covers. She's in commercials. She's all over the place. But she, too, was built using an algorithm, and this is how they did it. OK, so if I hadn't told you that at first, it might have looked a little funky, right? You might have thought that the video was hiccuping. But nobody really knew that she was computer generated. And she was everywhere. And then once people found out, they weren't super happy about it. So what happens if algorithms designed people like robots? This is Roxy. This is all that I can show you of her. She's a sex bot. And she's one that you can create yourself. So you can design her physical attributes. You can create a base personality. So I guess your standard sex bot, real doll sort of things. But here's the piece that's different. You can custom build your own personalities, and they have an AI element, and they learn as you use them. And so she or he, in this case it's a she, becomes the perfect companion to you because she is literally responding to everything that you are telling her. And the most disturbing thing I found was that on the website, they advertise that you can share the personalities digitally. And this is a quote. "This is the same as wife or girlfriend swapping without any of the social issues or sexual disease-related concerns." So there you go. What if algorithms designed people-machine interfaces? So this is an experiment research group from a couple years ago, University of Washington. This guy's wearing a device on his head that's connected to the internet. And he is thinking his thoughts to somebody else who's far away on a different part of campus. And they're basically transmitting each other their thoughts over the internet and causing each other to do things. So a different guy thought, I want this guy to move his hand, and this is what happened. Here it is again. So this is kind of, amazing, right? And this is a monkey who's now rolling around on a machine and getting closer and closer to this little bowl over here where there are some treats. There's no steering wheel. This is not some kind of cool automated Uber car. This is the monkey controlling it literally with its brain. So it is a completely fused human, or I guess primate, machine interface. So that's today. Where are we going? So 30 years from now, computers will design the interpretation, how we interpret the world around us. So that means hyper-personalized news content. Because of your mobile device, I know a lot of things about you, including your schedule, your location, whether or not you're moving, who you like, what you like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what that means for the horizon is that rather than writing a single news story and sending that out to everybody and hoping that people like it, instead, a single news story will be written. It'll incorporate the details. For example, something blew up in Harbin, let's say in northern China, and you were recently there. The lead would start off, Bob, remember last summer when you were up in Harbin eating fish? Well, 20 miles east of there, a giant factory blew up. And that won't happen just for one person, but for every single person who would potentially read that story. So the nugget of news will be personalized using our own data, and then our activity at that moment, at that time. So here's the conference room version of the story. Here's the I'm about to go skiing, I've got 2 minutes version of that story, and so forth and so on, which means that there's an infinite number of possible stories that will be distributed. In the year 2046, there are editors, but there are no longer any staff writers, which is super popular when I tell journalists this. Generative language bots and personalization algorithms will craft stories for each individual reader, so you will have your own personalized newsfeed. And because there are so many different opportunities to get content, the value that news brands will continue to provide 30 years from now is that it's vetted. It's content that has accurate data that can be trusted. So I told you about the teacup pigs. In China, this paper was published not too long ago, a couple of months ago. So they've already started using CRISPR-Cas9 not to edit just little teacup pigs, but to edit humans. So they have already started editing human embryos. Which means that today you can clone your puppies. There's a lot of services that allow you to do that. You could bring your dead dog back to life again and again and again and again. Some people have done that. It also means that 30 years from now, computers will have helped us become desensitized to loss. This is me a few years ago wearing a neuro-enhancing headband. And the idea is that I can dial myself up. It gave me heart palpitations, but that's a separate issue. I can dial myself up and down so that I'm still having this experience, but my interpretation of that experience is different because I'm changing the activity in my brain. Which means that 30 years from now, I'll be able to pre-program my mood the way that I do my smart home in the present day. My 5:30 in the morning preset might be that I'm stimulated to read and to get going on my day. And on Thursdays, I dial myself down around 4 o'clock to take a nap. But we'll use these not just for personal productivity. We'll probably also find that in other cases, we're using them as well, like making prisoners wear some kind of similar device in order to maintain order. The second trend is recognition. So our keystrokes it turns out that our keystrokes are recognizable, more so than your signature. So if you apply the sort of machines can think idea to recognition, what we learn is that we all type very differently, and it's unique to each one of us. So you can actually use your keystroke style, how you type certain words, your particular rhythms, the length of things that you type, to make inferences. So keystrokes measure a very deeply human characteristic about each one of us. Our photos can also be used for recognition using the same kind of machines can think technology. So this was built by a friend of mine, Hillary Mason, and it was just an experiment that goes through all of somebody's Instagram photos and uses a few recognition tools to suss out what's in them. So without knowing anything about me or me explicitly teaching the machines to do this, they figured out that these are ball players, this is my husband, et cetera, et cetera. And it's doing this two ways. It's using a deep learning algorithm trained on the ImageNet data set, which is popular, and also labels, so that the text that's assigned to them using the lexical database WordNet. Our faces are easily recognizable. So there's also been a lot of deep learning experimentation into figuring out how to recognize who we are, even if we're not right in front of that person at that moment in time, or if we're in the dark. So this is an example out of Germany, some research. We could be in a completely pitch black room, but our faces have their own heat maps. And as a result of that, we can identify you based just on the thermal fingerprint that your face leaves. And so here's what this means in practice. Let's play a quick game of Where's Waldo? Does anybody spot Waldo? It's not really Waldo. Yeah. OK, so that's Waldo. I'm not interested in Waldo. I want to know who this person is. Can you see her? Let's zoom in. There we go. I want to know who she is. OK? So I only have half of a face. It's very blurry. There's somebody with a jacket in the way. And yet, using these tools, it took me about 5 minutes to figure out who she is. So this is Karen. Her last name starts with a B. She lives in British Columbia. I know her address, her phone number. I know where she's traveled. I know that she's in a domestic partnership with Doug. This is Doug. Right? And this might be terrifying to some of you. Or, for the marketers in the room, this could be an opportunity. So let's go with the positive. So it turns out Karen loves football. She's a huge fan of this British football team, the Columbia Lions. Not British. The British Columbia, sorry. Canadian geography. Yes, the British Columbia Lions, big fan. Yes, there you go. She goes to games. She posts a lot on Facebook. She likes to wear the team colors. So let's say that she was at a game. Using this technology, you could recognize her, throw her up on the big screen, announce that she's a huge part of the community. You could have somebody waiting in the wings with all kinds of swag and gear to give it to her, obviously videoing this the entire time. She'd completely lose her mind, right, being the super fan that she is. And she would immediately post this to Facebook, where everybody else would realize, wow, they really care about us fans, and then they would all post to Facebook, right? And it would solve a marketing challenge, getting people to the stadium. It would increase brand affinity, make people want to buy stuff, and all of these things would have people, it would sort of stop them from thinking, why in the hell were they able to figure out who I am, right? And why do I like you? And then all the stuff that I like.
It's even worse than that. FanCam is a company out of South Africa. They're already doing this. Their cameras are already in their football stadiums. They can watch you at Madison Square Garden from South Africa and zoom in on your face and do all of this already.
So that's Scoble. Talk to him later on. He's the person who knows about all of this stuff, Robert Scoble. Okay, so yes, you're absolutely right. So we're already doing all of this. So what are the implications of this 30 years into the future? So I read like the USPTO, like other people read People magazine. This is my USPTO. So I look at patents all the time. This is probably the most interesting patent I've ever seen. It's 350 pages long, and it reads like a science fiction novel. That's in part because some of the people who inputted their information in this are famous writers, and it was filed by Magic Leap. So Magic Leap is a company that is pushing the boundaries in AR, and I just wanted to highlight a few things that have to do with recognition and our biology. So this pair of glasses, you know, little cameras here, scanning us, looking outward. And inward. Well, that's what I'm about to show. So here are some of the crazy things that I thought were in this patent, and it's going to sound like science fiction, and sometimes patents are now written to include everything, but you have to assume that they are at least trying to work on some of these things in real life. So the system can determine the curvature and size of the eye, which assists in identifying the user, since the eyes are similar but not exactly the same size between people. It looks at the film that our eyes create. It looks at how we breathe, what our blink rates are. The systems can correlate images of the environment with different eye movement patterns, right? So this is highly, highly, highly specific stuff. What might you use all of this for? Well, let's say that you love these shoes that I'm wearing. You could glance at my shoes and set up a parameter in the system so that when your currency account, I didn't say bank, goes up, you know, past a certain threshold, like you've got 500 units in there or 5,000 units, at that point, you'll make the purchase, okay? And that would all be set up and triggered automatically. And there are other interesting things like glance-based click-through buying and different ways that advertisers might be incentivized, right? Fascinating stuff. So those are teeny tiny cameras, but what about all the cameras that surround us? So Robert just mentioned the FanCam system in South Africa. You know, if you start looking around, and this is sort of what I do for fun, you know, there are cameras everywhere today, right? We are, given what we know to be true about today, this is, you know, cameras are everywhere 30 years from now. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And there are all different kinds of companies that can do everything from long-range iris scanning to different features and different micro features of how our faces move and react that will not just figure out who are you, but given the historical data, you know, are you angry? Are you about to blow a gasket? And should we start following you? Should law enforcement start tracking you because you look like you're about to commit a crime? You're leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere, and you are connected to other people leaving digital breadcrumbs. 30 years from now, the thing that we will be willing to pay for those of us who can afford it, is the opportunity to be anonymous. That will be worth more than everything. All right, our last trend is bringing all this back together. Artificial neural networks and the future of AI. So you're probably aware that a few years ago, YouTube connected a whole bunch of computers together, along with somebody, Andrew at Stanford, and the network taught itself how to recognize cats without ever being explicitly told, these are cats. And a lot of people made fun of this, but it was actually a huge big deal. And this is an example that I could talk about for 8 hours in a row, but I won't, of an artificial neural network. So basically, you know, here's this network of machines that is trained by showing millions of images and adjusting the network parameters. The humans do this at the moment until the classifications are correct. And again, it comes back to this idea of thinking. So computers that think, right, are modeled on our own neural networks, our brains. So it's the same basic idea. And it's because of this that if you type a search into Google, like kids, you get faces of kids, right? And not just faces of kids, but there are all of these sub-taxonomies where you could have different varieties of faces of kids. These networks are being trained to learn by doing, just like we humans do. And so the key difference, and this goes back to what I mentioned about Go, is that this isn't being done through brute force. There's an element of creativity here. So if you go out and look at the clouds and you find images in the clouds, nobody taught you explicitly to do that. Well, Google's machines haven't been explicitly taught how to do that either. And they're doing the same thing that we can do now. So in the clouds, Google found Admiral Dog, the pig snail, the camel bird, right? And the same thing, was able to see these things in different images. This training has helped machines how to act and to think more like humans. And so here's what this means in the future for us. So Siri used to be a standalone app. It used to be much more powerful, much better than it is. And when Apple acquired it and then re-released it, it was the thing that everybody loved to hate. So Nick Bilton wrote a description of his experience with Siri in the times when he was still there. Siri lured me into a relationship, promising to help me set up appointments, to gently wake me in the morning for work, blah, blah, blah. She's always polite, but I'm starting to suspect that I'm really sorry is just something that Siri says to shut me up. Most people talk about Siri as though she's a dumb, nagging girlfriend. And that continues on to today. I have a good friend who works for an AI startup. And it's still in a closed beta round. And it's being tested as people are using it. And so some of what they're looking at, their requests that are coming in, and the AI has a female name. Questions about what she's wearing. Questions about her favorite sexual positions. And really awful, horrible, explicit comments. Horrible, so bad that I will not even tell you one-on-one, at happy hour.
And you will.
These machines, but here's the problem. These machines have parents, okay? The programmers, and they have textbooks, and the textbook is our data. And so here's what happens, right? So this is Google automatically recognizing images, and that woman is clearly not a gorilla, okay? Now, to Google's credit, they immediately went on Twitter, they immediately addressed the issue. But the problem is that this issue exists at all. Right now, Google recently marketed some personalized criminal records files back to a Harvard professor who, by the way, used to be the CTO for the Federal Trade Commission. Speaking of that, if you type in the word CEO into Google, which I did on St. Patrick's Day, you get all white men, right? And why is that? Because we tend to type in CEO, right? And we click on the white men. The first woman that you get to is CEO Barbie. And I had to scroll to get there. I've been picking on Google. It's not just Google. This is across the board. This is Bing. And here's the sort of gut-wrenching thing. People are more likely to click on the word CEO when they're looking for a picture of a CEO than they are Barbie, CEO Barbie, right? Who shows up later down in search results. And it's impossible to find a woman. And forget about trying to find a person of color. Okay, same thing at Yahoo. We are their mothers and fathers. To AIs, we're their study buddies. We are creating them in our own likeness. And we, humans, can be horrible without even realizing it. By the year 2046, we will realize that we taught machines to think and that they've been learning from our own structural racism, misogyny, and homophobia. So I don't want to end this on a terrible note. But I do want to come back to that question. What happens when we get what we say we want? Do you want to coexist with machines that can think? I do, right? I'm really excited about this. But these machines that can think aren't going to be what we've envisioned. They're not going to be squishy robots that walk among us. They're going to be more like IBM Watson, right? And these tools that we use to do what we already do much better, to supercharge our own abilities. The future isn't something that happens to us passively. It is something that we are all creating together in the present, which means that you have the opportunity to create your own desired future, to change some of what's happening now, to ensure that where we are by the year 2046 is better off than where we started in the year 2016. But you have to ask yourself, when it comes to technology, what does it mean? What does it help? Who does it help? And why does it matter? If you want to make a dent in the future, you have to start by making a dent in the future today.